In the preface to the Missal of Paul VI, and also in the council documents themselves, we can see that the Lord is present in different forms, different modes to his church. But I have always been touched by the way that in the monastic choir, the two parts of the choir face each other, and at the incensation, the one where the incense comes in the midst, and after the Lord himself has been incensed, the two sides of the choir are incensed, often actually monk by monk, but they are looking towards each other, and the Lord is in the midst. That hit me from the earliest times, being exposed to the monastic choir regime. Jesus in the midst. It was something that I was already familiar with in Protestant days, insofar as we would, in prayer meetings, both in school and in the chapel vestry, be aware of the promise that we had, and we would claim it, that where two or three were gathered in his name, he was there in the midst, and that also we could claim his promise that when we agreed on earth on what to pray for, he would be listening and would hear, and also the promise that what we asked in his name, he would grant. Indeed, there was an expression in the Welsh spirituality of prayer meetings applied to those who knew how to lead in prayer, that they would pull the cords of the promises, gafael and rhafar addewidion. Certain people were anointed with a gift of leadership in prayer, and they would take off and lead the brethren with them. In the liturgical life, it is also the case that the mystagogue, the celebrant, must be able to draw the people with him, and not to him, unto God. He must disappear, as Moses did in the cloud, and the people would be in fear and trembling before the presence. Both in the prayer meeting mode, which we have also in the charismatic renewal, there is a creation of an atmosphere by carefully chosen words and even physical modes of behavior and gestuality, recuperating the body, which is healthy, because we're not just mind. So too, in the life of contemplation shared in the monastic life, there is that element of sharing something greater, and of therefore creating an atmosphere that suggests it. And in the monastic life, where life is actually shared, that must be an expression of Trinitarian life, which is charity, which shortens purgatory and can even avoid it. Charity hides a multitude of sins. I do remember being shocked by the difference in approach to things between the Chartreuse and La Trappe in one specific element. Because the Charterhouse has not evolved in the same way, Cartusia numquam reformata, quoniam nunquam deformata, never reformed because never deformed, it was still very much in high mode of vocal prayer. Of course, the whole in great mode of contemplation, but the quantity was huge, and much of it was in cell, and therefore not sung. There was a doubling up of offices, and even a tripling up, the office of Our Lady and the office of our dead on top of the office of the day. The result being that one had the notion of having to have certain prayers said between certain limits of time. And the difference was huge at La Trappe insofar as the Reformed Cistercians had entered big time into the liturgical renewal and evolution, which had drastically reduced the number of vocal prayers, but gone more into celebratory mode, with everything as far as possible being sung. And the prayer meetings coming in, and a certain element of variation between the offices, notably in the prayers at the end, would lend to a certain attention to what was being said in a different way, and therefore one was very much aware that every word did count and wasn't just to be said without thought. There were two modes of approach, therefore, and I remember being moved by the spontaneity of the weekly prayer group at La Trappe on a Sunday evening before Compline, before the Blessed Sacrament actually. And the creation of this atmosphere is something that one finds in quite a few modes of spirituality in the Church, especially in the likes of the Focolare. They have this idea of Jesus in the midst, Gesù in mezzo, and they live charity to the utmost of their ability, and know that Jesus is very much in the midst of those who come in his name to pray and love, and avoid any word which might offend that charity. A simple spirituality, therefore, which avoids sharp edges, because there is a danger in a system which is very detailed to presume that the details can actually hold the life. They can support the life, but the life has to be there. And when there are no details, one goes straight to the essence. It should be the case also in our liturgical renewal in general. Alas, what happened in many places was that we had more of the same thing, even after the changes. High speed, for instance, and not paying attention to the reduced numbers of words, for liturgical renewal, correctly understood, is a grace. But we have not been listening always to what the Spirit was saying to the churches. In Pope Benedict, we have that openness of mind which saw exactly what the point of everything was, and in him we have the perfect blend, the ars celebrandi. He loved well God and man. He understood the beauty of what was received from the distant past, and didn't use a JCB or a bulldozer to get rid of it overnight. But he also loved the one that he was handling and imitated him. And therefore the complete spirit is not presumptuous, thinking that he's the first to get it right after 2 millennia, and doesn't throw overboard what he has just found, as though he had power over it and thought he knew better. Jesus in the midst is a notion that we need to look at again, because if he is there, we will not have less attention to creating an atmosphere than they would in a free church prayer meeting, or any prayer meeting for that matter, but more, the whole art of genuinely sharing prayer, whether it is spontaneous in its expression or liturgical in its mode, is of the essence of prayer itself when done together. One can't pray and not pray, and one is not praying if one is hurting someone else. It is a nonsense in the eyes of God when, in the interest of praising God, we have these sharp edges, and it happens a lot. For musical or liturgical perfection, it matters little if so-and-so goes away with a bleeding nose. Jesus hurts in that bleeding nose. And so it helps somewhat, as the Church itself has been hinting at over these last 50 or 60 years, to have a certain noble simplicity in which one is not thinking about detail, but about the Lord. To have things happening out of natural habit helps greatly. I remember that being told me after ordination, il faut un certain automatisme, a certain automatic mode is needed in such a way that one is celebrating without thinking about the rite. And of course, at our monastery in Italy, the rite was complicated. We had maintained all we could of the Premonstratensian rite, and therefore many details were to be thought about and things memorized in Latin. But after a while, when one knew things, it became much more easy because one was free then to fly into contemplation, and the structure maintained things. A grace for our time is that we have quite a few chants that we can use without having to have books or sheets. These chants, repetitive and beautiful and harmonious and such. It is a help to have at one's fingertips quite a few things that all can join into without having to have books each time. Creating therefore an atmosphere in which Jesus is at home is a grace to be asked for and to work towards. There is a beauty in giving the Lord that one thing that he asked for in worship. Worship in spirit and in truth.